Describe a typical day that you would have.
So I am not sure that I had a typical day, although there's some characteristics. A first challenge, which has prepared me well for my current job, is you can easily go all day and be in meetings stacked up. And one of the challenges is being mindful about what meetings to take. And that takes some affirmative effort on your part to make sure you're hearing through lots of different people. So I made affirmative efforts to make sure I met with consumer groups and entrepreneurs regularly. There's a phrase that the vice president used some that Dale Hatfield just loves, which is, the future doesn't have a lobbyist. And so one challenge that anyone serving in government has is, how do you make sure that the information and perspectives you're getting are wide-ranging? So one huge swath of meetings I would always want to make time for is meeting with outside people who are across a range of different people. And when I would do so, I tried to be as transparent as possible with all of them so they could give me effective information and ideas. Number two, internally in the White House, you have different meetings where you coordinate. Some people could say the White House is like a mini Congress because you have a domestic policy council who tends to view things through a certain lens. You have a national security staff who views things through a certain lens, and also science, technology, policy, a Council of Environmental Quality, and for example, in smart grid, it's conceivable that all 5 of those areas could have different perspectives on the same emerging technology, and you need to spend time to get to know them and engage them. And I will say, one of my big lessons, which motivated most of what I did, is how much relationships mattered. I was fortunate to have a lot of those going in and develop more while I was in the government. And then finally, the White House can only be as effective as how much it catalyzes, empowers, and works with other parts of the government. And also in these areas, take smart grid as an example, many different agencies might be doing their own thing. So obviously the Department of Energy would have a huge interest, but the Department of Defense, a military base, is looking at smart grid technology. And the National Science Foundation might be funding research related to it. And the Department of Commerce is helping set standards with NIST, so I'd have to meet with them. And so you have to figure out to balance these different meetings and then manage your nights to catch up on email, read and write, in order to be effective and to keep moving along different initiatives. So I'm not sure they ever lent themselves into kind of easy, and obvious boxes, but they were sort of a melange of these different types of meetings, mostly.
You gave, I think, 2 or 3 examples of ideas that sort of germinated and you sort of summarized the policy dynamics, the sort of idea, and then the next slide was policy. Obviously, there was a path. Walk us through what that path might look like, including some sort of texture about all the kind of people involved in the front end of the process. And what that looked like.
So, great question. Let me start with smart grid as an example. And I will have to say and thank you all, because I could not have done this job without the 10 years I had here first, in so many different ways. So for example, you'd be surprised how much like a Silicon Flatirons conference is translatable to working in the White House. So first of all, being willing and able to call something out as BS or not is really important. And having relations with people over years where you got used to saying, come on, be real. And that enabled me to cut to the chase of an issue. And it's really important, if you can't cut through the rhetoric, you'll never get something done. So there's some people in the world of policy who are good at reading their talking points, but you'll never make progress if you're just talking to each other's talking points. So you need to get a level of discipline and rigor and understand where the challenges really are. Now, in smart grid, I mentioned one of these broad challenges, which is the state of the electric utility industry has had a business model and a set of incentives and a set of technologies that were built on a certain set of premises. Like energy was always plentiful, and we didn't worry about using lots of it ever. Second premise might be that people can't, won't, or shouldn't manage their technology. It's too time intensive. Now, when the world changes, you have to say, how do we re-examine policy? We had started some of those conversations here. When I got to the White House, I said, well, who's working on smart grid? And so we had a meeting where people from different agencies came, and we said, is there an opportunity for us to frame our agenda? And by the way, the fact that a lot of money from the Recovery Act was going to investing and catalyzing smart grid deployment made it all the more important to call out, particularly for the states who had most of the power in this area, because most of the utilities are regulated not by the federal government, but by state public utility commission. So can we get on the same page? And what you're getting at, Brad, which is important to explain, is what is a policy process? What people often outside the government don't readily appreciate is you can't just get the president to give a speech on X or issue a report on Y and have it be done, like a business plan by entrepreneurs on startup weekend. It's very different. So you need to start by getting the people in the room, many of whom have different perspectives, and saying, can we start working on some principles together? And literally, if it's a document, let's say the report, you have to build consensus with an interagency group, and we did establish one under the auspices of the National Science and Technology Council as a committee on technology that myself and Ms. Chopra chaired. And then we get a report, we have to get all the agencies to clear it. And then the report's ready for release. And then the question is, how are you going to roll out the report? And so we did go ahead and issue the report in a rollout, which turned out to be the last week I was in Washington. And it was an effort to frame a discussion and move the policy forward. And one challenging policy is that you don't necessarily always get clear wins and milestones, okay, we've done it, because it's an ongoing journey. And the goal, I would say, is often, can you shape the debate, frame the debate in terms that move in the right direction? So the wireless spectrum case is another one I worked on. That one, I had mentioned, written this paper before, which people said to me at the time, well, that's a nice academic idea, it'll never happen. I think Preston might have said that, actually. So I thought, okay, I'm an academic, that's fine. It'd be a good idea, it'd be, as I said, win 4 times over. The White House looked at this and said, wait a minute, we're looking for pro-innovation policies. This also could generate revenue in a time when we need more government revenue. Can we make this happen? So literally, we talked to all sorts of the people who were involved. So Larry Summers and I would go to talk to Senator Jay Rockefeller, who's chair of the Commerce Committee, saying, we're thinking about announcing this, what do you think? And we'd go to Henry Waxman, chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, what do you think? And we'd talk to the broadcasters and say, what do you think, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd help to shape what we saw as a policy strategy. And when we rolled it out, we didn't roll it out with all the details worked out. And this is an interesting, also part of the story. Many times policy needs to evolve and needs to start by putting some stakes in the ground and making progress and building on it. In this case, the first step was that speech by Larry Summers, then the President in the State of the Union and Michigan, then Senator Rockefeller introduced the bill, which passed 21-4 from the Senate Commerce Committee. And the policy evolves some over time, and you can see some pretty constant principles. And the latest iteration is being discussed now in the super committee because it would create money that would help deal with our long-term fiscal situation. So there is this path of a policy process. Max Weber has this great quote from Politics as a Vocation that says, it takes both passion and perspective. And he says it's a slow boarding of hard boards. If you aren't able to have that passion, perspective, and stay at it, it's not going to happen overnight. And I was there long enough to see a lot of things make some progress. And someone said to me, it's hard to know what will be most important, because 10 years from now, I might look back and say, oh, this thing I worked on, nanotechnology, could have made a huge difference in how the government dealt with nanotechnology, and I never would have guessed today that was the thing I worked on to be the biggest impact.
So you touched on a little bit, sort of in that arc, interactions with Congress. And, I know sort of your lens to some degree from where you were in the White House. What was the interaction with Congress? At what level? And what kind of expectations did you have about those interactions?
So I have never worked in Congress, and I largely have that as the branch that I am least versed in. So I clerked for a couple years for judges, so I kind of get the judiciary, and worked 4 years in the executive branch, so I kind of get the executive branch to some degree. Congress is still somewhat of a mystery. I will say, in my time in the White House, I was impressed with some of the people who I worked with, who are aides on Capitol Hill, impressed by how much they cared about ideas, and impressed by how much they knew what they didn't know. And our ability to work productively was one of the things I really cherished. I also, maybe this helped, was a student of the Constitution, and Article 1 comes before Article 2. So it's a symbolic gesture, but I never asked people from Congress to come to me, I always went to them. And I tried to be extraordinarily, diligent about returning phone calls, emails, helping them however I could. And they were extraordinarily interested in hearing what we had to say. And in all these areas, we tried to brief Congress so that nothing we were doing was a surprise. Because I think that often is what gets sometimes administration in trouble when people in Congress say, why didn't you tell us? You blindsided us on this, or if you told us, we could have told you X, Y, and Z, that you might not have done that way. And I think there was nothing I worked on where I ever got that sort of call. I was lucky, I think, and also the issues I worked on were lower profile, so we were less likely to get that attention. If we were going to meet the member, that was generally something that Larry Summers or Gene Scorley would do, and I would go along to brief them. But a lot of the work, as people probably know, gets done at the staff level to really develop the details. So that was something I said, of the things I wouldn't have expected. I didn't expect necessarily working so much with Congress, but I did spend a good bit of my time, particularly the Spectrum Initiative, because that had to go through Congress, in working with them. And then also there's working with other people who are going to be talking to Congress. So if someone has concerns, if they're a TV broadcaster, you better listen to them, because if you don't, they're going to talk to Congress, and Congress will say, what about these concerns? And you better have a good answer to it.